this. I'm taking the cap off. I have fucking edited out so many caps in our episodes because they're so loud. And I always take the opportunity to do it when you're talking. I'm like, okay, Alex. So I have to like literally get in there in my personal track, clip that one little sound note. It's just fucking...
There you go, Misfits, all the sexy behind the scenes here that we get into. It's deep shit. It's deep shit.
Super deep.
Roll those credits. From Sydney, Australia, all the way to Portland, USA, two misfits hang out after class to riff on the B-sides of professional life. These are your professional misfits. All the way from Sydney, Australia, I am your host, Christopher Sellers.
From Portland, Oregon, I'm Brody Ipox.
And we're your professional misfits, where we riff on the B-sides of professional life. And it is season 2. We're discussing relationships, folks. We're discussing personal, professional, family, everything in between. And in this little mini arc for episode 15, we're talking about dealing with loss. So for a bit of context, you know, obviously not always the happiest of subjects and topics, but should we avoid it? Absolutely fucking not. You know, that often makes it harder, doesn't it? So let's try and have an open discussion around loss, around what it means to us. I mean, about the grieving process and coping and sort of moving on, you know, when and if we can. So Brody, I guess the simplest place to start, and it's probably the elephant in the room, but you might have touched on it before in a previous episode, is do you want to open up about like your story recently? And it sort of goes hand in hand with the Misfits as well, which is sort of an interesting timing.
Yeah. You know what? I'll be honest with you. I don't know where to start. I came into it with my questions and, you know, the intention set. And, you know, I think starting out in this conversation with the Misfits, I just have to say, like, for me, this is all kind of a learning curve. You know, I've been through loss more than once, and significant loss more than once. But this most recent one, the level of awareness that I have, it's just, it's made the experience different. It's made the experience different. So if there was, you know, even just one question that you could give that would kind of help me walk into the explanation or experience.
Sorry. I think I solidly pushed you under the bus there.
It's every episode.
It's every episode. Yeah. Hey, man, here's the subject. What do you think? I guess, all right. So loss can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I mean, obviously, death and the loss of a loved one, that's first and foremost, right? There's also, you know, loss of relationships. So we've all been through breakups. You know, some of us may have been through a divorce or something like that. That's a significant loss or death of relationship or connection, and that has its own grieving process. So, you know, I lost my keys once. It was tough.
That actually can be pretty damn tough.
You know, I had to call a locksmith, and I'm like, oh man, you know, I had to get into my apartment. So that was rough, you know. So, but I got through it. Good. Happy to say I got through it.
Good.
So the thing is, and with most of these conversations, Misfits, like loss, relationships, love, careers, professions, it affects us all in different ways, and it means different things to a lot of us. And so we're exploring what this means, and we're exploring what these connections are and what happens when you lose them. A big one also as well is when you find that you either lose a loved one or you end a relationship. A big part of loss for all of us is losing a sense of self and identity, because often who we see ourselves as is reflected in this other person or the connection that you had with them.
Right.
I think if that's fair to say. So if you suddenly lose a best friend, you're like, shit, well, was I a bad friend? You know, was it me? If you lose a parent or something, it's like, well, I used to be a son or a daughter. Like, what happens now in this mix? You know, or if I look, I was going to say I got dumped recently. That's not quite true. It's like I reached out to an ex for like a little something. and she turned around and said, yeah, look, I'm kind of seeing someone now and it seems to be the real deal. And I'm like, right. So that relationship that we had and the sort of maybe casual, even when it moved into this sort of casual thing, that's no longer there. Right. And so I have to come to terms with, nah, man, that little something you had on call just isn't on call anymore. And I'm like, and I have to reconcile that. Right. So there's gradients. There's a lot of different dynamics. There's a lot of gray and mess in here. And obviously it's uncomfortable and it's awkward. And more often than not, we don't know who we can talk to about it. We don't know if we're allowed to talk about it. Generally, if we're men, it's like, you shouldn't talk about it. You know,
I think, right. And I think a big piece of that last statement and the one prior, a lot of people don't know how, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know how. Like, for instance, when you threw that question at me, it's like, I could probably sit here and ramble for hours about it, you know, but like realistically trying to frame it in a way that's understandable in a general sense, I just don't know how, you know what I mean? It's
so, all right, then how's this then? Like, with your permission, can I give the Misfits some context and I can give a little lead in?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, folks. So again, we're never ones to avoid the elephant in the room. So here's a little bit of backstory. Around about the time that we founded Misfits, Brody's mum at the time had been diagnosed with cancer, pretty serious stage. It looked like it was going to be a one-way street. So it was very interesting for us to sort of enter into this project with the full awareness of what was going to happen and where this was going, and my full awareness of what Brody's going to go through and how is he going to manage this and is he going to be available. And I remember asking you a few times, like, do you even have the bandwidth for this? Like, are you going to be okay? And you found that Misfits was a grounding sort of platform. All of that aside, and up until about 2 or 3 months ago, Brody's mum finally passed away. So it's been 2 or 3 months now in the wake of this passing. So relevant to this episode, I've been there as a third-party witness to Brody confessing, this is what I'm going through. His guidance and journey through that, through supporting his mum, through supporting his dad and his sister and his family and his own kids, the eventual passing of his mother, and now 2 to 3 months on, how he's coping and how's it all going. So I've been a impartial witness to a lot of this, but it's very, very different to what your lived experience has been. So is that how's it been for you? Let's start with where you are now. And if you want to backtrack a little bit to give a bit of context, that's entirely up to you.
Yeah, it's weird. It's strange again for the Misfits. I think the not knowing how, listening to Chris frame it, you know, from his perspective, I'm not going to lie to you, I was starting to get emotional for a second there. Just kind of from outside in, watching the timeline in your sense, you know what I mean? And again, like you said, the lived experience is so much different. So, you know, where I'm at now, it's a strange game. I think grief is a tricky bitch. Grief is a tricky one. And there's some days that are crippling. There's some days that are crippling. And there's other days that it feels like the loss is the motivation. And I'll be honest, right now, that particular up and down is the hardest part. You know, I think you know me well enough that I kind of like to be that push past it guy,
Yeah.
and like I said earlier, now with a little bit of self-awareness and watching myself and feeling the situation a little bit differently, there's just certain things you can't. I don't care how hard you push. You could physically exhaust yourself. You could overwork yourself. It doesn't go away. Like, it's dealt with in some way. You know what I mean? And whether that's the overworking or, the avoidance of it, it's a very present thing. It's a very present thing, grief. And I think what's happened for me, and especially in the last 2 years, because look at it like this. When she got diagnosed, I kept thinking forward. Okay, who am I going to be, when this does happen? Am I going to accomplish the things that I want to accomplish in the space that she's here? Am I going to make her life better? Are these X, Y, and Z, all these things, right? And it was always this forward thinking. I was never in the present moment that, hey, my mom's got cancer and she's not going to be here. So then to flip forward and she's gone, you start to go, oh shit, I didn't prepare myself for that at all. As much as we were living in it and we were part of it and we were aware of it and, in some way prepping yourself, right? Like, again, I think the mindset was just so drastically different because grief brings you straight to the present, right? And it's weird because I realistically, that's somewhere I would like to live. I think that's where life happens. But I haven't been like that, for years, and not just with the cancer stuff, but with business and just plans. It's just been, what's the next 5 to 10? What's the next 5 to 10? And this really brought me back to earth. Like, hey, you're here now, and you're going through this, and there's not a goddamn thing you can do to run from it. So that was a little bit broad, but that's kind of where I'm at, where I'm like teetering on the edge of it being a catalyst for change. And then personally inside, it feels like crippling is just the best way that I have to put it. I think in the past it would have been self-destructive because that crippling feeling, you want to break out of. You want to do anything you can to get away from that.
To feel something else. Yeah.
But now I don't do that. You know what I mean? So
good man. Yeah.
I'm stuck here, what it feels like, right?
Yeah.
And, yeah.
I guess, I think that's important to recognize as well, because it can be both, and it can be this mix. And like you were describing, like one day I wake up and it's sort of, it's a release and a driver. And the next day it's like, it's a black hole of despair. And I remember offering to you a few times, it's like, because you felt like you should have been better prepared, or you've been through this before and I know what I'm doing, but this hits differently. It's like, bro, there's no rules to this. There's no rules. And it is a bit like learning to walk again, because you're having to learn to cope with something that, you're only going to experience like a handful of times in your life, and it's never going to hit you the same. And again, I'm the luxury of being objective over here, and sort of offering advice. What was I trying to say before? No, I've sort of lost it, but that's
okay. One thing that it actually brings up that kind of resonates with me in this moment is that there currently where I'm at, it feels very lonely, right? It feels very lonely. And not in the sense that I don't have support or I don't have people. It's kind of what you were just saying. There is no rules. So the situation itself is unique, and it's unique to each party involved. So even my sister and my father and my grandmother, it's drastically different. My sister and my mother had a way different relationship than me and my mother did. My grandmother, that's her daughter. She lost her daughter, and my father lost his wife. They're all completely different situations, yet we're so grounded in the sense that we experience it at the same time, you know. And that's the thing. I love him to death, but it just feels lonely. You know what I mean? Because I lost my mom. You know, not in the way that my sister lost her, not in the way that my dad lost her, not in the way that my grandmother lost her, and not in a way that I can rightly explain here. You know, and it's just, it's something that's something that I didn't expect. I knew I had the support, and I have a great network of support. I thought that, and again, God, this makes me, and I'm trying not to sound ungrateful for that, because that's not the case scenario. It's just that there's just loneliness, and something that I'm understanding too is, you know, even in our age group, you know, 30 to 45, a lot of people haven't lost their mother. So even when I talk to someone and they can sit with it for a second and go, oh shit, that's scary, that would suck. And the relatability is there. It's weird now, because I get that, right? Because now that I'm in it, I'm like, God damn, that kid had no clue. He had no clue. He had no clue.
And I remember you saying as well that, like, sort of closer to when she passed, that you were surprised how many people came out of the woodwork. Like, oh, actually, I lost my mum, my dad, but even earlier, like in their 20s or or whatever. So it's interesting hearing you describe this loneliness now, where even 2 or 3 months ago, you're like, holy shit, man, like everyone's an orphan. That's
true. That's true.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm probably in this boat. Like both my parents are alive. However, my mum lost her dad, I think, when she was about 18, while she was studying at nursing college. But he literally had a heart attack and passed away on his bed in front of them while they were waiting for the ambulance, for instance. And then my old man, similarly, I think he lost his dad mid-20s, you know? So it's interesting by way of reflection, because now that we're grown up, my mum looks at her children, because her mother's now passed on when we were in our 20s. So mum's ostensibly an orphan with her sister. So she looks at us now and has mentioned once or twice, like, you're all I have. Like, you kids, you know, which has never occurred to me. Just call it naivety or
look how long loss affects someone.
Right. You know, and to be fair, yeah, like losing, what is it? Like losing the death of a loved one, especially a parent, is one of the biggest, most significant griefs and obstacles every single one of us will have to reconcile with at some point. And again, there's no rules, and it is often conflicting and confusing. I remember, again, as things were getting more serious with your mum, and eventually when she did pass, we did have that conversation, and you were feeling a little bit guilty because it's like, it's actually a relief because she's no longer in pain. And for the rest of you, like your dad, your sister, and yourself, it wasn't this daily routine of waiting of, is today going to be the day? Is now going to be the day? Like, is it going to be tomorrow? You know, it's been resolved. She's no longer in pain. It's been resolved. We can sort of all move on. It doesn't make it any easier because, you know, you have lost a loved one, but is that fair to say? Is that how you remember it?
Yeah, no, I think it was about 2-3 days after, and I told you, I messaged you and I said, I'm just feeling weird right now, you know, and it was that. It was relief, you know, and look, there's two pieces to that. So there's a selfish piece, and then there's the piece that's, you know, selfless and was worried about my mother. She was in a ton of pain. She's in a ton of pain, and that's That's awful. That's awful. We all know going through some level of discomfort, right? Imagine the most tremendous amount of discomfort, and with the thought in your mind looming, I am dying.
Mm.
I don't even know how she did it with the grace that she did, but that month, it realistically was like a month, because we were doing some stuff for season 2 about that time, and so I was in and out. That was one of the hardest pieces for me, was watching her go. Just not an experience that I think even now that I understand. And it's bizarre because there's nothing to understand. She was dying in front of me and I was watching it. But mentally, I don't know what the impact actually was. I was actually telling Tiff about this. I don't know if it's something where I say, hey, look, I am, for all intents and purposes, on paper good. You know what I mean? Or I can say, the image of the last few weeks of her choking on her last few breaths, her eyes losing their color, just stuff that I wouldn't wish on any human being for any loved one. Because you're watching them physically go too. And it's, God damn, it was an experience. And I just don't think that there was any part of me that was prepared for that. And that was just, like I said, it was just the hardest part. So when you get to the end of that experience and it's weeks of minute by minute losing your mother, and almost, I don't want to sound arrogant here, but almost because of the mental attachment that you have physically being able to feel the fucking pain that she's in and just wishing it would end for her. It was relief. I mean, it sucks because I'm going through the loss part of it myself now, where I'm thinking of all the moments that she's not going to be around, the things I'm not going to get to tell her and share with her that are just heavy and lonely and sad and that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't want her to suffer anymore.
Yeah.
And any fucking more. Because those last few weeks and watching the amount of suffering someone can go through just changed you a little bit. So yeah, I'd say relief was pretty damn accurate. Yeah.
And that's totally fair, I guess. So if we're moving, and thanks for sharing this. So for the Misfits at home, Brody and I checked in yesterday, pre-production meeting, and said, look, this is what tomorrow's episode is about. Are you ready? Are you happy? Are you comfortable talking about it? And he's like, yeah, I think so. So we're navigating this in real time with you guys. And this is the first time Brody's properly opened up about it sort of in public. So I want to give a lot of respect and credit where it's due in the way that you handled it up until now. So moving from loss, because I know we've all experienced it, and I think if anyone's lost a parent or a very close loved one, they can identify with absolutely everything that you're describing and going through right now. Are you familiar? And I want to know if this is helpful or not. Like, are you familiar with the 7 stages of grief?
Not enough to call them out or identify them. No.
So I did a quick little searchy. And there's either 5 or 7, but I think I like the 7 better. So I'll walk everyone through them so we can get an idea. So obviously step 1 is shock. Whatever it happens to be, it's shock is number 1. Denial comes next. Anger is the 3rd. Bargaining is 4th. Depression comes after bargaining when it doesn't work. And then 6 is the acceptance and hope. Now, what interesting, step number 7 is then processing all of this grief, like processing the journey, processing everything that you've been through. So I'm going to ask you where you think you fit at the moment, but what I'm going to suggest, because I have been through this in a different way, is that even though it's laid out in 7 neat steps, it's a bit more like hopscotch. Like you might land somewhere, like you might be angry and then shuffle back to shock and denial, then try bargaining for a bit and then go back to being angry and then be depressed, and then maybe have a taste of hope and then slip back into being, so there's 7 stages, but by no means is this the ladder that you climb to get out of it. So do you find it helpful, or do you find it trite in the where you're at?
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny how accurate it is. You want to argue it because you're like in it and you're like, shut the fuck up. You don't know a damn thing. But what struck me when you were going through them is I hit every single stage the first hour after she was gone.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, like that. And you were saying each of them, and I remember every moment of each of those stages. And I'd say for right now, it's acceptance and depression that I'm bouncing back and forth between. Okay. I not necessarily landed on the final step yet where I'm able to piece this all together, because that's one of the things. And I'll be honest with the Misfits. I am spiritual. I have my own beliefs and systems there. I believe in a higher power. And this is just one that I ask, why? Why? What am I learning? What was the impact? Why? And I'm still really struggling with that why. So I think it kind of distorts the landing on the being able to process it, because it's like I get to that point through the acceptance phase where I'm accepting all these things, and then something comes to me and I'm like, oh, that's one I can't accept right now. I can't accept that right now. And it reverts me right back to that. So I'd say it's accurate. I'm not gonna argue with people that are smarter than me and took the time to identify. It's just interesting that I think you nailed that though. I think it's hopscotch more than anything. I don't think it's 1 through 7.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's 1, 3, 2, 7, 4, 5.
3 months, 6 months, 5 years. Yes. And it's.
Yep.
Again, there's no rules, folks. And this is a discussion and exploration of what everyone's been through. This isn't a how-to process in 6 easy steps. Right.
And I'd love to know within that, what are some of, maybe how to frame that, some of like the misconceptions or myths or, maybe cliches about loss that have or haven't sat with you in your own personal journey.
Right. Yeah. I think it's spicy. All right. I think it's interesting that once this concept of we can't speak ill of the dead. So if someone, for instance, they might have been an absolute prick for most of their life and a terrible father and husband and all this sort of shit. But once they're dead, we should, stand up at the funeral and go, kind and loving man, generous soul, blah, blah, blah. I think that's interesting. I think it's interesting. I think it's to whitewash people's lives like this often. That's never really sat with me. Like, are we all supposed to sit in the congregation and know that you're lying, but for the sake of social acceptance, go, oh, yeah, let's applaud and what a loss, not that, he's a miserable cunt and he deserves to be buried. Great. Something like that. But it's even, so I have I don't know, do I share this story? Because I didn't want to turn this episode into a complete like Debbie Downer of an episode. But one of my,
Sure.
All right, one of my most confusing and sort of traumatic experiences was the guy that I was running a kung fu school in my 20s, and the guy that taught me was more or less a god figure in my eyes. Now, it took a really, really nasty turn because he was engaged. He was engaged to be married. Basically, turns out the relationship was semi-abusive, to the point that he was arrested and charged and put in jail sort of overnight, was processed, then got out on bail and made the news. Anyway, so got out on bail, borrowed a shotgun in a friend's van in the broad daylight, drove, right, you know where this is going, but drove to where his fiancée was staying, shot her in her car in broad daylight, drove across town, and then committed suicide. Right.
Wow.
So this, right, horrific story happened in Newcastle, circa 2004-ish, 2003, 2004.
I don't want to interrupt and backpedal, but for the Misfits, like, I mean, if you've been following along, you know the Kung Fu School has a significant impact on the trajectory of Chris's life in positive ways, as well as this. And just like with my mother, this is actually the first time I'm hearing and seeing you open up about, because all I've heard is it went to shit.
Yeah, I know it's obviously not a story you kind of share at the dinner table,
right.
But we're here, and the reason I'm sharing it is for this reason. So this is massively violent, traumatic, horrific, unjust circumstance, like something out of a film, right? And so all of this aside, very, very complicated for me to reconcile, because here's a guy that I revered as God who proves to be the devil, does heinous, unjustifiable things. So how should I reconcile everything that he's taught me and sort of instilled in me and certain values compared to his literal actions in life? And then I go to acting college. Ridiculous. It's not.
Wow. Let's not.
Right. And that's the thing. Like, I don't know whether it was the best of the right. I don't know whether it was the best or the worst thing for me, because I'm processing like heavy trauma. And first year acting college is, why do you walk like this? Why do you talk like this? Like unstitching every element of yourself to figure out your emotional and psychological makeup. And of course, I'm damaged and don't want to be touched, and like, don't tell me how to move. Do you know who the fuck I am and where I've come from? Like, geez, talk to me about physicality. So yeah, really, really interesting time, and survived, but that processing all of this through 3 years of acting college and somehow survived it. So it's so, and with that came like loss of identity, loss of the school, loss of my entire trajectory of life. Because as far as I was concerned, I could teach until I was 90 and be happy and be respected and have a community around me and have friends and family. And this was going to be my life. All of it snatched away in a horrific, violent incident. And if we're looking back at these like seven easy steps to process grief, I can tell you that it probably took the better part of 5 years longer to accept I was never going to be this kid anymore. That future had been snatched away. You'll never have it. You'll never have the keys to the kingdom. You're the prince. You'll never be the king. And so how do you...
Well, let me ask you something.
Yeah.
I mean, so you're going through that, and a significant amount of loss involved in so many different dynamics if you actually sit and break it down and think about it, which is just wild. But then too, like you're talking about keys to the kingdom, would you have wanted them?
No. No. I mean, this is,
and
again, sorry, this is the nutshell version of
right
of the story. But and the short answer is no. And it's funny. Years at least 2 years later, I remember sitting in a park in the middle of the night, finally sort of being relieved that he was dead, because he'd forever be like this demon or figure that would sit over me in life. And so there was finally some sort of release of, well, I can live my own life.
There was now. Your relief.
Yeah. Some sort of acceptance. Yeah. So what were you going to ask?
No, I mean, that you gave the explanation. So, back to the kind of original question, would you say that the cliche that we love the dead is just false? It's just, God, right? I ask it out loud and I'm like, damn it, like.
Well, this was the thing. So I was invited to the funeral, which was controversial at the time.
I could imagine.
They couldn't publicize it because for a whole bunch of reasons. It was held at a St. Vincent's chapel. They had to take donations to afford a casket and and whatever else. I remember at the funeral, they used a photo of him that they took from my 21st birthday party, because they didn't have any photos of him smiling. So they took this photo, they cropped me out of it. They took his smile anyway. And then you go and have a wake at the Chinese restaurant afterwards. And it was just a really weird and awkward time. And that was the thing, that was, everyone was aware of how his life ended and what he'd done, but we're going to try our best to be respectful and dignified. Can't blame people for that. And I guess for all of us, if we're talking about, funerals and wakes specifically, again, it's the ritual, it's the communal ritual of getting together to mourn a loss. So I guess it makes sense to keep it as PC as possible, because it's sort of a lip service event, and you're going to go home and going to process it in your own way. Now, all of this is very, very. These are extreme examples for both Brody and I,
right? And
hopefully, there's some value for you guys listening at home. And we don't want to turn this episode into too much of a downer, but similarly, the breakup of a significant relationship. Or if you've ever been dumped, or you've ever had to dump somebody and sort of move on, you're going to go through the same 7 steps, and you're not going to get a funeral or a wake. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And they're still going to be walking around. They might even meet up with somebody else. This sort of thing. So in a way, you're mourning a death, but they dared to stay alive and to date somebody else. So have you ever been through nasty breakups, Brody, where, you go through the same process, but, they just ripped your heart out?
See, man, I hope one of them isn't any of them.
Yeah, that's where the juice is. Yeah.
No, I think I did the heart ripping, and I was not.
He's a heartbreaker, folks.
Not the most sensitive.
Hide your daughters.
Not the most sensitive guy on the planet when I was in my youth and in that kind of arena. I'll just be dead honest with you. I was completely self-absorbed. So in those kind of dynamics, it never struck me. I wasn't losing something. And if it was leaving me, it was good that it was leaving me, right? I just had that mindset. I never wanted to let what those losses were teaching me teach me. But I'll reconcile not having an answer with this. I have lost friendships though that have in a sense felt like that. Someone you talk to every day, you relay important and critical information, you get vulnerable, you guys have instances of connection, just your best friend. And then it's funny that you said it like that in the dynamics of the relationship, how, you know, they're still up, they're still out there, and they're still alive doing the shit, right? It's like, I just kind of recently experienced that this year with this kind of lost stuff with my mom. It brings to the table this kind of interesting dynamic that when people don't understand, they either dive full force in or they pull full force back. And that's kind of what happened here. And that struck me, and that hurt, and that sucked. And then, like you're talking about, I realized I was going through those stages of loss and grief with this too, because it was like I almost expected to have that, right? Weird, but expected to have that support, and that I thought it was going to be there when I was going through this one. You know what I mean? So it's like, to have to go through and look at it in that way as well. Yeah. So I have experienced it in that sense with friendships and with something, you know, outside of death. But that's a weird one too, because they are, you just want half the time, right? With me, at least. And it's funny you brought your ex up at the beginning of this episode. Half the time with me, at least, I always want to reach out. I always want to say, hey, I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit. I just love you. You know, I just love you. And whatever happened or what is happening or the communication that's fraying between us, let's not let it, you know, like, and it's interesting. I don't. I wonder if and what would happen if I did, you know, but maybe that's the human in me where I'm just, you know, I feel somewhat jaded, and it's almost hard. That's something that's hard to admit for me, because I don't, you know, I don't go out and say those things or try to reconcile on my end, or those relationships don't seem to get the repair that I could give them. So yeah, that's a weird one. That's a weird one. And you know, the same thing where I struggled with the why from the creator, right? With my mom. I struggle with the why from the other person in these situations where it's like, well, why for you? You know, like, was it something about me? Was it the way that we interacted? What happened? You know, like, and it's always just that question. So, I mean, for you, tell me about something that, because I feel like more so for you in your current situation, you have some instances like that where you've very recently had to say, I think for your own personal leveling up, I've got to let some of these things go.
Yeah.
That's lost too.
Yeah, it is. And that's equally confusing, because you think, here's one example. The first girl I ever broke up with, because normally I get dumped. Well, I used to, and so then I finally met someone that I could break up with. But it was funny because I was in London. I was dating this girl for about 9 months. No, not even, probably like 6 months, whatever. And over breakfast, I discovered she was racist. Yeah, bro. So we were breakfast.
Okay. Pause. What level of racism?
Here we go. Here's the story. Breakfast, Holland Park Road, sitting down. I just moved into a new place with my flatmate, Louise, and Louise was dating a Nigerian guy, I think, named Thomas. So Thomas is black. And I was saying, I was hanging out with Louise and Thomas, and Laura was this girl's name. She looks at me very oddly and goes, "You've talked to them." And I go, that was my
level?
Right. Okay, so everyone who's listening on Spotify, go watch Brody's reaction on YouTube. Right. That was exactly my face. And I went, them, like, as if they're a foreign species, like, the fuck are you talking about? She's like, oh, I've never had a conversation with a black guy. Now, for context, Laura was 25 at the time. She'd lived in London for 5 years. There is a lot of black people in London. And again, I'm looking at her like, what the fuck planet are you from? And she goes, well, there's just none from where I'm from in Leeds. which is a lie. So in that moment, you do like, is that film thing? I did this mini flashback in my brain of every party I've ever been to, all of your friends, white, middle class English, everyone that you hang out with, white, middle class English. You don't talk to the Polish girls at work. I thought you were shy. Maybe not. Right. So it's funny. It was funny that with all her other issues and the issues in our relationship, which I was seemingly willing to tolerate, the instant I discovered she was racist, walked her directly across the road and said, this isn't working out. And we had planned for her to come back to Australia with me. And I'm like, we're done. Thanks for your time. It's been real. That's that. Ended it in an instant. Like one of the clearest moments of my life.
Jesus
right.
Christ.
Bro. Now, but here's where it got really confusing, right? So obviously this is the right. No, but so in the aftermath, right? So I know that I've made the right choice. I know that we have no future. I know that you're kind of a despicable human being and probably the worst kind of racist because you don't even recognize that you are racist. Anyway, so all of this stuff, right? Centered, core-driven values. That's that. Why then? A few weeks from now, am I feeling kind of lonely? And I'm wondering if it's, this would really work out. And then I do this, I ask Louise, like, what do you think? Like, Laura, should I? And she's like, she's supposed to give me good advice. So fuck you, Louise, in Denmark, wherever you are. You were supposed to say, no, Chris, you're better off without her. But Louise, because she's a musician, she's like, if it's in your heart, you should try and see what happens.
Come on.
Right. This bitch. And then so I do. And then I send her the text or whatever. And she's basically like, I've moved on and I've got a puppy and like whatever. And I'm like, okay, cool.
The
and
fucking time span. What?
I don't know, like a couple of weeks.
Oh,
whatever.
God. Thank God you dodged a fucking bullet, my friend.
I did, but this is where this sort of sense of loss and all this sort of is so confusing. Like, I know I've done the right thing, and you replay it over a million times, I'd still make the same choice. But then why afterwards do you still kind of go through? Okay, here's off the list. I go through anger or bargaining. Like, maybe it could work out. Maybe is there a chance? Is it no. And then when I don't get my way, then it's anger and shock and denial and all this sort of shit. And then it came the depression of, Chris, you were dating a racist for 9 months and you didn't even realize? Like, what does that say about you? Yeah, this sort of shit. I'm like, nah. So eventually got over that and eventually stopped dating racists. So but that was, when you're broken up with and when sort of like you're the victim of the loss, it seems like the grieving seems normal and natural and justified, right? But if I've been the catalyst of like, I'm ending this, and still you get sucker punched with the 7 stages of grief. Wow. It's like, but I did the right thing. But I did the right thing for me and for everyone. Why am I getting fucked over?
I imagine that the misfits that have had to cut off anybody, I mean, including relationships and, our previous arc, just so you guys know, was familial. It just strikes me too, because again, I don't want to push and I don't want to insert myself in your situation, but you currently, as much as I am, you're dealing with a lot of different dynamics of loss as well, and, we had talked about this a little bit in terms of the relationship that you have with family.
Yeah.
That's a critical hit. I think a lot of people don't talk about, because just like you're saying with the girlfriend, right? And this is where I'm connecting them. You've got 9 months of positive experiences, sexual experience, all these things that connect and, really identify as loss when it's gone. And you've got family that you were fucking born and raised to.
Yeah.
What does that look like when you have to say to them, I can't, for me, I have to lose you.
Yeah. Yes. Like you've made a really, really, really interesting, excellent, and wise point in joining these two dots, and you're right. So what I guess we're objectively, I guess what we're talking about, Misfits, is change. And so if life circumstances shift, your relationships and dynamics with the people around you are going to be affected. And so how do you manage those? So what Brody's talking about is designed a couple of months ago, designed a fintech app, which at the moment is on the waiting list for 10 million worth of investment from Sweden, and possibly even more from the US and the UN. Go figure. Anyway, but what Brody's specifically identifying, which I've talked to him about, is my parents, my brother, my family are used to seeing Christopher the Misfit creative, who writes and produces films, who, you know, wanted to run a kung fu school, but it didn't really work out, and went to actor college and went to London, then went around Europe, and then came back home and has done a whole bunch of, you know, oddball jobs and taught himself sleight of hand and takes photography. And so Misfit, Chris, creative. And they're used to me sort of kind of struggling for money or doing X, Y, and Z. That's their relationship to me and my identity, I guess. Now, funnily enough, around about the time that we started the Misfits was the time that I founded this platform, this financial platform. So the timing is interesting. And should this go through, and we believe it's a when, not an if, my profile is going to be rocketed to the top of the pyramid as opposed to the Misfit creative. And already my parents and my immediate family have had difficulty in adjusting to this concept and adjusting to the change that I'm creating. So I'm actually creating a different life and role and profession, and I guess kind of identity in a way. Still the same guy, but it's shifting into a different sphere. So are they going to be able to come with me on this journey? And from the outset, there was some pretty complicated discussions because they didn't, you know, you say you designed a new fintech platform, and we've already had 2 independent investors say yes to 10 million, and they both have business plans. And we're waiting for them to come back to us. My family's initial response is, yeah, but most startups fail, you know? So they would argue it's coming from a place of concern because we want to keep you safe.
Oh.
Right? No, yeah. And every parent says that, and I'm sure you've all winced at home as well. But then my counter to this is, cool, that might be true, but if it wasn't that, what else would it be? Like, is it possible that you want to keep me in the same place? Is it possible that you want to see me a certain way? Is it possible that, you know, the idea of Chris being the CEO of a fintech app doesn't fit with the kid that you raised, or what you believe, or how you see me? And I've said to Brody, like, I anticipate a big discussion coming probably around Christmas when we all get together. And if you can't get on my page and support me for what I'm doing, whether it fails or not or whatever, if you just can't support me or be on my side, I'm not going to include you in this. And I don't know if I have to cut you off entirely, but there's definitely going to be a massive sense of loss and change here, because you aren't facilitating who I am and where I want to go. So you make a really interesting point that this sort of loss and change. I know we started out heavy talking about grief, but this sort of loss and change sometimes is a result of positive growth and proactive change. And I guess this is how you tied it into my story before. It's like, I'm making the right steps. I'm investing in who I am. I'm committing to what I'm doing. I've done something that no one's ever done before. And I'm probably still going to have to go through 7 shitty stages of grief to reconcile that I might not have certain friends and family on this trip. So what the fuck is that? you know, but here's my choice. Do I not do it? Do I sit on my hands? Do I back out and go, I'm not ready to be the guy? Or
How many people would? How many people would?
Yeah. And yes. And I'll admit, like, you talk about this loneliness. This is the same thing, man. Like, if I'm right, then there's you and there's my business partner, Robbie. So we're all equally crazy because at least you guys get it and you're in. But from my immediate world around me, they're like, bit of a risk, fintech, I don't know.
Which drives the question from outside in, that it's like, you know, you had framed it that they're used to Chris in a certain way, right? And again, I don't know if I'm positioning this right, but almost to where they've had to, God damn it, like there's almost some level of disappointment that you didn't live up to an expectation that they may or may not have had. Right.
I'm still getting told I should go back to uni.
Okay. Right. Okay. So you're there, right? With that point in the relationship. And then I'm just saying, just a brief explanation of what you're doing warrants understanding from any rational person. So then as parents who have objectively wanted you to succeed and do something kind of in the arena that you're about to compete in, why wouldn't you support? What for them is the loss, right?
Because they see it as a risk, right? And so for both of my parents, incredibly risk averse, you know, worked in four different people all of their lives and had careers. Like, they were of that generation. That's what you did. For my old man, education was the saving grace. So, like, uni is the safest bet, and a degree is the foundation that you can build everything on. Right. He comes from that generation. It doesn't seem to shift his thinking or want to. So that's what you're dealing with, is a very, very set mindset. And it's been a source of frustration, you know, for months, even though I'm an adult. It's like, why can't you just be proud of me? Why can't you just support me?
Which I don't think is a wrong feeling to have.
Right. And sorry, this ties into, I guess, the episode subject, because I'm sort of grieving the loss of a supportive parent, and because I'm starting to realize it's not just this thing. It was high school and failing my end of year exams because I had glandular fever, but then still getting into uni, but then it wasn't good enough, and then dropping out of uni to run a kung fu school at 21, which is something that people make films about, but meant nothing to them. Meant the world to me, but meant nothing to them because it wasn't a thing. Audition and get into acting college wasn't an achievement. Graduate, go to London, produce all this sort of work isn't of value. You know, so anything that I was passionate about, anything that I cared about and invested in and did on my own for myself independently, seemed to have no value or no worth. So what really punched me in the face again this time around was that arguably I've never had supportive parents.
So would you say that you've been in kind of the denial stage of this?
And probably still, because I'm still, there's that shred of a child who's like, you'll come around, right?
We've had that
I'll land the 10 million and then you'll be on my side. And then the thing will like branch out into all these different countries, and then you'll see what I've done. And it's probably naive, and I'll probably never get it. But the option is I have to give up that you were ever supportive of anything that I've done, and did you ever really love me then? Which is terrifying.
It is a terrifying thought. And look, I will say this as a parent, and you know, kind of centering around love and loss right now. I think there are certain people that don't understand what love is either, right? We're sitting here and we're talking about loss. We're talking about, you know, a heavy, impactful subject. And look, I'd say the real solution to loss is love. And if you don't have love in your life when you're experiencing loss, it's going to be 10 times harder. Not to say that you can't make it through it, not to say that on your own will and efforts that you can't survive. It's just that is the answer. I hate to be that cliche, but then like we're talking about, so those situations and those circumstances where you have to realize, shit, I might not have it. What advice would you give someone? Because again, standing from outside in, you've been dealing with this a lot longer than you've actualized right here. You're like, oh shit, I have been going through loss for quite some fucking time. And again, for me, just looking at you outside in, not denial in the naive way, just denial in, like you're talking about, in the sense of hope, right? This is a different situation. I'm hoping, I don't have to.
Yeah.
I'm hoping, know, what would you say to someone going through the same thing?
I don't know. I don't have the clarity around it just yet.
Love that.
Well, and like we've talked about, like there's a lot of waiting involved. So Misfits at home, I sent NDAs to both these investors 3 weeks ago, and we're kind of still waiting to hear back. So 3 weeks to me is a lifetime. So when people ask, how's it all going? It's because we did a lot in the space of 2 or 3 months to get ready from concept to delivery. Right. And so now I'm waiting on someone else to give me money. I don't have an answer. I don't have an outcome. I don't have control. So there's a lot of gray for me right now, and I'm kind of treading water until things are ready. So I don't have an explanation or solution or 6 easy steps for people at the moment. My only advice, which I give to myself as often as I give to anybody else, is 1, there's no rules. We've covered that. 2, because there's no rules, be kind to yourself. Try and be kind to yourself. I try and remind myself of this because I'm my own worst critic and harder than most people would imagine. But yeah, sometimes you're going to wake up feeling like shit. Sometimes you'll be okay. You don't need to feel guilty for that. Enjoy the sunshine. Enjoy the fresh sea air. Enjoy good coffee. Whatever the little pleasures in life that you can take, be kind to yourself, because you're the only one that's going to have to live with yourself for the rest of your life. Guilt isn't as useful as you think it might be. It's fun to beat yourself up with, but it's not as effective or useful in life as you think it might be. I think I'll leave it there, because the rest is just waxing philosophical. And really, again, for context, you've all been through breakups. You've all had someone significantly pass. You're going to have people break up with you and have them significantly pass. Find, even if you think you can't or you don't have permission, find people and places where you can discuss it. I'll journal for my mental and emotional sanity. And if no one else sees it, fine. But it's a vent for me to get everything from the inside out. So that's always step number 1 for me. Step number 2 is then to find someone that I can share with. And those trusted people are few and far between. My way is not the way for everyone. So find what's going to work for you. Actually, to wrap up, B, what's been the most helpful for you in the last couple of months, constructively?
Yeah, if I think if I had to compile it down to keep it simple and not too deep into the philosophy of it all, is make your bed.
I like it. Yeah.
Make your bed, clean your room.
Yep.
Yeah, that's one thing. I think grief and loss and all the stuff that we're talking about can become so heavy that the overwhelming nature of it just throws you off. So you have to find your grounding somewhere outside of it, right? Somewhere outside of it. And like you're talking about, whether that's conversation or talking with someone or journaling and, getting the inside out. Yeah, for me, it's been make your bed. If I can keep my space clean, I know that I can keep my head clean. And, that's the best I got.
The one last thing I think I'll offer is there's no harm in seeking help or asking for help or reaching out to professional help. You aren't weak. You aren't less than. You're not supposed to deal with this on your own. I have a very good psych. And I remember when I first started seeing her, she made it clear. It's like, no, you have a ton of external stressors which are impacting your life. And for some of us, we might not have always had the best framework or home life or demonstrations of how to cope with grief or loss or any of these sorts of things. How many misfits at home like reach for a bottle or reach for avoidance or reach for other self-destructive tendencies just to get through the pain of something? And we know that's not healthy, but we still do it. Right. So if your other option is to find a therapist or find a psych or someone that you can talk to, surely that's a healthier option, even just to get some clarity as a sounding board. Like, is this normal? Is this okay? Am I supposed to feel this way? Because grief, if nothing else, is confusing. And that's probably the most honest response we can give in this episode. Loved ones, death, breakups, sense of identity. We've covered it all, and it's confusing as fuck. And it's not a straight line, and there are no rules. So best of luck with it. And we're out. So thanks for joining us. We have no answers. We have no solutions, but we're glad you're here. Brody, have you ever lost your keys?
I lose my keys too damn often.
There you go. So they used to that with loss. All right. So we'll wrap it up there. And no apologies.
If nothing else, it's confusing.
Right. And no apologies for today's episode. We decided to go there. If you guys find value in it, I hope you do. We've just been as honest as we can about our lives and our situation. Fun fact, Brody, do you know what's coming up next?
Oh, shit. God.
Take a drink. Every time.
Never mind.
Brody doesn't know.
It's so screwed up because we talked in pre-production last night, and he'll ask me in pre-production what we're filming about the next day, which would have been today. And I knew that episode, but I did not know what's coming next. So go ahead and
so the good news is we wrap up this little mini arc of familial relationships, and then we move on to the last 5 episodes of season 2. Where we're talking about everything else. So we're coming full circle, and we're talking about love in the next episode. So what is it? Who is it? How is it? How does it affect us? We can talk about something happy and positive, maybe. So we're talking about love in the next episode, and I'm sure in a few episodes' time, there's going to be an episode for you Misfits to vote on. So get ready for that. Brody, are you ready to talk about love?
Oh, so ready.
Beautiful. So, folks, you can find us, you can listen for free, and you can watch us build on YouTube and Spotify. Find Professional Misfits. You can find us on TikTok, on Instagrams. Join the Facebook group and the LinkedIn group to vote on all the things. You can also join us and support us on Patreon, where you get 2 weeks early access to episodes. So you could be watching episodes of Love right now and not even know it. Mm-hmm. And there's merch coming. There's sexy merch coming, which Brody is having produced as we speak. So you get all the sexy bonuses for that as well. So come and support us on Patreon. In the meantime, I've been Chris.
I've been Brody.
And we have no solutions for you, Misfits. So stay classy, and we'll see you on the next one.